Microsoft has made Windows for 40 years. In those 40 years, they deleted your files, crashed on live television, and forced upgrades onto computers without asking. They built a feature that screenshots everything you do every few seconds. They put advertisements inside software you already paid for and called them recommendations. They have made the same mistakes over and over, and somehow they are worth $3 trillion. Here is every failure in order. Windows 1.0. In November 1983, Microsoft announced a new graphical interface for the IBM PC. It would use Windows, a mouse, and menus, everything the Macintosh had just introduced. The industry called it vaporware immediately because Microsoft couldn't ship it. 2 years passed. Windows 1.0 finally launched on November 20th, 1985, a year and a half after the Macintosh. It had one fundamental problem. You couldn't overlap the windows. In a product called Windows, the windows tiled side by side like spreadsheet cells. The Macintosh could overlap windows from day one in 1984. Critics were brutal. A Microsoft employee writing years later called it a joke in the industry. Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs put it plainly. Reviewers ridiculed it and consumers spurned it. Apple mocked it openly. The industry wrote it off. Microsoft shipped it anyway, because Bill Gates understood something most people didn't yet. It didn't need to be better. It needed to be on more computers. It worked, just not for a very long time, and not without enormous embarrassment. The next failure happened on a stage in front of thousands of people. The blue screen of death live on stage, in front of everyone. On April 20th, 1998, Bill Gates was on stage at Comdex in Chicago. He was presenting Windows 98 to a packed auditorium. The centerpiece of the demo was plug-and-play USB support. The idea, plug in a device. Windows detects it automatically, loads the drivers, everything just works. Gates' assistant, Chris Capocella, plugged a scanner into the demo PC. The scanner was bought off the shelf that morning, not the tested, validated unit from the lab. It tried to draw more power from the USB port than the spec allowed. Windows 98 responded the only way it knew how. The entire screen turned blue. The audience erupted. Gates didn't miss a beat. He smiled and said, "That must be why we're not shipping Windows 98 yet." The line got a laugh. The moment got a permanent place in tech history. Microsoft was so embarrassed they modified the design of their production studio, a building under construction at the time, to add a dedicated staging room so it could never happen again. The scanner was kept. It was mounted on a World War II infantry helmet and worn by an engineering manager to meetings for the rest of the project. Windows 98 actually launched 3 months later and sold 25 million copies that year. The BSOD on stage turned out to matter less than the OS itself. The next failure cost $6 billion and mattered considerably more. Windows Vista. Development of Windows Vista began in May 2001. The goal was ambitious. A complete reinvention of Windows with a new file system, better security, and a modern visual design. Bill Gates later called Vista the best $6 billion Microsoft ever spent. It took 5.5 years. It launched January 30th, 2007. Within weeks, it was widely regarded as the worst version of Windows since ME. It required hardware specifications that most existing PCs couldn't meet. PCs that had run Windows XP perfectly felt sluggish under Vista. A new security feature called User Account Control, designed to prevent malware, interrupted users with permission prompts for virtually every action. Open a program, permission prompt, change a setting, permission prompt, plug in a device, permission prompt. PC World named it the biggest tech disappointment of 2007. Computer manufacturers including Dell and HP began offering their machines with Windows XP reinstalled alongside Vista because customers were demanding the old system back. Microsoft had spent more than 5 years and more money than almost any software project in history. The result was an OS people actively tried to avoid. The next disaster was designed to stop pirates and managed to mostly punish legitimate customers. Windows Genuine Advantage. In April 2006, Microsoft quietly distributed a tool called Windows Genuine Advantage through Windows Update, labeled a critical update. Its job, verify that your copy of Windows was legitimate. If it passed, nothing happened. If it failed, Windows displayed persistent pop-up warnings every 2 hours. Your desktop wallpaper reset to black, and you lost access to non-critical updates. The problem was the false positive rate. Hardware changes like a new motherboard or BIOS update could trigger the tool. In August 2007, Microsoft's WGA servers went down entirely. The outage temporarily flagged enormous numbers of legitimate Windows installations worldwide as counterfeit. An Ars Technica analysis estimated that over 20% of all flagged installations were genuine copies incorrectly marked as pirated. Microsoft acknowledged the problem but was slow to fix it. Paying customers were being treated as criminals by the software they had purchased. Not before it had trained millions of legitimate Windows users to distrust their own operating system. Windows ME, Microsoft's most unstable operating system. Windows Millennium Edition launched in September 2000 as a consumer upgrade to Windows 98. It was the last operating system in the Windows 9X line. It was also the most unstable operating system Microsoft ever shipped commercially. ME crashed constantly. It corrupted files without warning. The System Restore feature, meant to help users recover from problems, frequently caused new ones. Hardware drivers behaved unpredictably. Microsoft dropped support for it faster than any other Windows version. Tech support staff nicknamed it the Mistake Edition. Entire communities formed around documenting ME's failures. Microsoft moved on to Windows XP the following year, and essentially never spoke of ME again. It became the industry benchmark for a product so bad its maker pretended it never existed. Windows Vista inherited that title 7 years later. But the failure that hurt the most came in 2012, when Microsoft removed the one thing every Windows user relied on. Windows 8. The Start button appeared in Windows 95. It sat in the bottom left corner of every Windows screen for 17 years. Press it and you had instant access to every program, every setting, every file on your computer. It worked with a keyboard and a mouse, the things every Windows user had. In October 2012, Windows 8 removed it entirely. In its place, a full-screen interface built around large, colorful tiles. When you pressed the Windows key, your screen didn't open a menu. It replaced everything you were doing with an entirely different environment. This interface was designed for touchscreens and tablets. Most Windows users had neither. They had keyboards and mice, and a new operating system that was built for hardware they didn't own. The backlash was immediate and enormous. Sales were below expectations. Hardware partners were furious. Users who could find a way to avoid upgrading did. Millions installed third-party tools just to restore a Start button Microsoft had decided they didn't need anymore. Microsoft had looked at the success of the iPad and decided the future was touch. They were right about the future. They were catastrophically wrong about the timing. The patch came 1 year later and fixed almost nothing. Windows 8.1, the fix that didn't fix it. Microsoft acknowledged the scale of the Windows 8 backlash in less than 12 months. Windows 8.1 launched in October 2013 as a free update. It brought back a Start button, but pressing it didn't open the classic Start menu. It took you back to the full-screen tile interface. Microsoft had restored the symbol without restoring the function. The button was there. The menu was not. It took until Windows 10, another 2 years, for Microsoft to actually fix it. 3 years, 2 operating systems, 1 Start button that should never have been removed. The next failure was more aggressive. Microsoft didn't wait for users to decide. They decided for them. Windows 10 forced updates. When Windows 10 launched in July 2015, Microsoft offered it as a free upgrade to Windows 7 and 8 users. A background application called GWX, Get Windows 10, quietly installed itself through standard system updates. It placed a small Windows icon in the system tray and offered the upgrade. Then its behavior escalated. Persistent full-screen notifications appeared without warning, interrupting whatever was on screen. The interface was quietly changed, so that closing the upgrade window in the way users expected actually scheduled the upgrade. Microsoft began pre-scheduling Windows 10 installations overnight, without explicit user consent. A Twitch streamer had a 9-hour broadcast interrupted mid-stream. A meteorologist's weather forecast was cut off on live television by an upgrade prompt. In California, a travel agent named Terry Goldstein found Windows 10 installing on her business computer without her authorization. It crashed. It became unusable for days. Microsoft support couldn't help. She sued. She won $10,000. Microsoft dropped their appeal and paid. Microsoft eventually backed down from the forced upgrade approach, but not before proving that for a period in 2015 and 2016, they believed their users' computers were ultimately Microsoft's to manage. The next failure proved that belief had not entirely gone away. Windows 10. Update that deleted files. In October 2018, Microsoft released Windows 10 version 1809. It was a standard update, mandatory, automatic for most users. Days later, reports started arriving. Personal files were missing. Documents, photos, videos. Entire folders gone after the update installed. The cause was a logic error in how Windows handled known folder redirection. A configuration where users had moved their default documents or pictures folders to a different drive or to OneDrive. During the update, Windows attempted to clean up what it identified as duplicate or empty folders. Its identification was wrong. It deleted folders that still contained files. The deletion was not recoverable through standard methods. Reports emerged that Windows Insider testers had flagged the issue before release. The feedback was not acted on because the number of affected testers was small. Microsoft pulled the update within 4 days of launch. A fixed version was released. The damage was done. Microsoft had shipped an update that deleted users' personal files, and the only reason more people were not affected was that the specific configuration required was not universal. The next failure wasn't a bug. It was a design decision. Cortana. Microsoft introduced Cortana as part of Windows 10 in 2015, their answer to Siri and Google Now. The problem was not what Cortana could do. The problem was what you could not do about Cortana. You could not remove it. You could not fully disable it. It ran in the background, used your data, and occupied space in the taskbar regardless. Enterprise users who needed to lock down systems found it nearly impossible to eliminate. Over the following years, as Cortana failed to build the user base Microsoft hoped for, the company quietly reduced its role. Cortana became optional. Then it was removed from several markets. Then Microsoft stopped mentioning it publicly. The product that couldn't be removed was gradually removed. Microsoft never announced this reversal in the same way they had announced Cortana's arrival. The next decision declared half the world's computers obsolete. Windows 11 hardware requirements. Microsoft announced Windows 11 in June 2021. The headline hardware requirement, a TPM 2.0 chip, a security module that had only been standard in PCs sold in the past few years. Millions of computers running Windows 10 perfectly, handling every task their owners needed, failed the Windows 11 compatibility check. Not because they were slow, not because they couldn't run the software, because they were missing a chip most users had never heard of. The reaction was immediate and furious. Microsoft released unofficial workarounds that allowed installation on unsupported hardware. They also released tools to check compatibility, which millions of users ran, discovered their PC had failed, and had to decide what to do with a machine Microsoft now considered obsolete. The requirement was real. TPM 2.0 provides meaningful security benefits. But the communication was handled so poorly, and the cutoff applied so broadly, that the announcement read less like a security upgrade and more like a scheduled obsolescence. The next failure was less about hardware, and more about what Microsoft decided to put inside the software they were selling. Windows 11 ads in the Start menu. Starting with Windows 10, Microsoft began introducing promotional content across the operating system. Suggested apps appeared in the Start screen, tiles for software that hadn't even been installed. Clicking them started a download. The lock screen began displaying tips and promotions alongside the wallpaper. The Action Center delivered notifications that looked like system alerts, but were prompts to use Edge or OneDrive. In 2017, Microsoft even tested banner-style advertisements inside File Explorer, the window manager at the heart of how Windows works, before public backlash forced them to remove it. In 2022, they tested ads in File Explorer again anyway, because apparently it needed to be rejected twice. With Windows 11, the Start menu introduced a recommended section that mixed recent files with promotional content. The Settings app began displaying subscription prompts for Microsoft 365. Microsoft called all of this recommendations. Nobody was fooled. You paid for the operating system. The operating system advertised products back at you. The final failure on this list is the most ambitious. Recall. In May 2024, Microsoft announced a feature called Recall as a flagship capability for new Copilot plus PCs. The idea? Recall takes a screenshot of your screen every few seconds, analyzes those screenshots using AI, and lets you search everything you have ever seen or done on your computer. Security researchers identified the problem immediately. The initial implementation stored all data in a plaintext SQLite database. No encryption, accessible to any application or any attacker, with local access. One security researcher called it a keylogger built directly into the operating system by Microsoft. Another built a command line tool in days that extracted and displayed the entire Recall database. The UK's Information Commissioner's Office wrote to Microsoft demanding details about the privacy safeguards. Within weeks of the announcement, Microsoft delayed the feature entirely. It would be made opt-in, not default. The database would be encrypted. It took a public security outcry to add basic encryption to a feature designed to record everything you do on your computer. Recall eventually rolled out cautiously to limited hardware with the improvements in place. Critics remained unconvinced. The pattern it demonstrated was not new. Microsoft has been making Windows for 40 years. They have put it on over 1 billion devices. They have made the same mistakes in cycles, removing things people rely on, adding things nobody requested, and building features for a hypothetical user who is more tolerant and less privacy conscious than the actual one. The difference between Microsoft and Apple is this. Apple's users forgive them because they love the brand. Microsoft's users forgive them because they have no choice. Both companies are worth trillions regardless. The pattern never changes. Neither does the customer base. Apple has their own long list of decisions that didn't land. Every major Apple mistake explained. It is on screen right now.